God promised to raise up His church and commissioned us to make disciples of all nations. While this is a mission that has a global reach, the genius of God's plan is that it's fulfilled within each local church or community of believers. So in this episode, we'll turn our attention to specific ways that healthy churches can grow and expand. Building upon the foundation of the last workshop in episodes 25 to 27, we now want to look at how this converts into local ministry and how those principles can be applied within a local church. George Patterson observed that churches grow in several predictable ways. These can be described as internal, expansion, extension, and bridging. Now, internal growth refers to believers growing in maturity and internal strength. It can include programs growth such as development of youth programs and schools and so on. It also refers to ongoing spiritual growth as members grow in spiritual maturity, and conversion growth as nominal members come to a genuine faith in Christ. If you recall from our last episode, this would be considered E0 outreach or evangelism. Now, expansion growth is a bit different, as it is addition of new believers from the immediate community. It can include biological growth as children from the congregation become church members, or transfer growth as members join from other churches. It could also be conversion growth as people are won to the Lord from the surrounding non-believing community. Again, this is primarily through the implementation of E1 evangelism. Now, the third type of growth is extension growth. It refers to the multiplying of the local church through reproduction and planting daughter churches. This includes the gifting and skills necessary for both internal and expansion growth, but also requires other skills. Patterson points out that relying on only internal or expansion growth and not extension growth by planting new congregations will cause a church movement to eventually stagnate and die. Then finally, there's bridging growth. It's the extension of a church's efforts beyond its own culture. It relies on E2 and E3 evangelism as it plants churches cross-culturally among people who may or may not be reached. There's a progression to these types of growth. For example, if a church is not healthy and mature, it will be difficult for it to extend itself. Consequently, if members are not encouraged to evangelize, then stagnation will also soon occur. However, churches don't have to necessarily be numerically large or exceptionally mature in order to be involved in planting other churches. From this experience, Patterson emphasized that the two principles necessary in order to see a church multiply is that its members are growing disciples and there is an ongoing leadership development and training. A church planting movement is at its core a leadership development movement. Perhaps you've heard the term an indigenous church and wondered what is meant by that term. A simple way to look at this concept is to consider that an indigenous church is made up of growing believers who are embedded in a community. They have not just been parachuted in from somewhere else, internationally or nationally. They have the characteristics of that community, yet are looking to transform the community from within. This actually means that the more indigenous a church plant, the more culturally distant it may be from the external church planter or missionary, or the church that it planted. It is actually quite normal for the original church planter to feel culturally uncomfortable in this new ministry. The missionary or church planter's role is really that of a catalyst. The role is to create the right conditions for the planting of an indigenous church. The indigenous church is something that develops and takes on a life and a characteristics of its own from within the community in which it is planted. It is not just the transference of an outside model. The traditional missiological description of an indigenous church is that it is self-governing, self-supporting, and self-propagating. Now, self-governing does not mean that the church has a Western approach to church government. It is more than likely it will incorporate what self-governance means locally. And self-supporting does not mean that there cannot be any funds coming externally from external sources, but rather that this refers to how these funds are handled and dispersed. The important issue is who is in control, who is managing these funds and determining their priorities. And finally, self-propagating does not necessarily mean that there is no longer a foreign component to the church. This component may be the very reason it is growing, but the local ministry takes local ownership of the vision and the responsibility. This is why a church is not necessarily indigenous just because it is growing with no external help. The point is that the goal is not just to transplant a church from another culture or location. If we do this, there is a greater likelihood that it will not multiply and reproduce because it is not embedded in the local community. It will only survive as long as it is propped up and supported by an external source. An Indigenous church that is part of the community and culture will be able to speak to that culture and that society. The goal is to have a varied cultural expression from within the local community with which those within that community can identify with. Now, maybe I make a point here. The two extremes need to be guarded against. Legalism is where all aspects of the culture are viewed as negative or anti-Christian, and syncretism, where all aspects of the culture are seen as good or Christian. How about your church? Is it truly Indigenous? What changes may have to be made so the local expression of Christ is embedded in the local community of which it is a part?
This series is based upon our MCNet coaching and ministry guides. There are basically two parts to the series, 12 episodes that cover the 5 sections of the coaching guide and 18 episodes that cover the 8 workshops of the ministry guide. As a team, we have had the opportunity to serve in various parts of the world over the last decades using these materials to equip leaders and coach ministry teams throughout our ministry coaching network. These ministry team workshops in episodes 13 to 30 are intended to equip members of the body as they serve on ministry teams. The importance of mentoring, team building, and multiplication strategies are discussed here, and these workshops coincide with the leadership team coaching in episodes 1 to 12, which cover big picture issues that affect the whole ministry. Each workshop has several episodes and can be listened to independently, though if you have the time, it would be helpful to listen to all of them, as they are connected and build upon each other. A couple of the workshops have only one introductory episode here, as the topic is covered in greater depth in another of Phil's podcast series, for which you will find links below. You can also check out our Christian Leadership Institute training program. This is a unique approach to ministerial training based on a competency-focused mentorship. The free materials for this series, as well as the coaching and ministry guides, are available from the links in the description box below. Just as many others have, we are sure you will find our other Leadership Matters podcast series helpful for you and your ministry.
Okay, as we continue our discussion regarding a local church as an embedded expression of the gospel in a community, how do we determine who we are best suited to reach? Can a church reach everyone in their community equally well? How will understanding our particular vision identity impact who we are best suited to reach? As we have discussed, God's heart is that His church would reach all peoples. This is the big picture. But what does it look like and viewed from the perspective of a local church? Well, the goal of the Great Commission is the whole world. Can every church really reach all people? Well, now, while strategies are many and varied, the simple fact is that the gospel spreads through relationships. Local churches must also be realistic as to who they can best reach given their gifts and resources. So the first step is to determine the people mix of those already attending. For it is unlikely that a church will attract and keep those who are extremely different culturally from existing members. This also can be related to the predominant gift mix of a congregation or what gifts are most valued. While we're welcoming to everyone, it is important to understand this fundamental relational truth of human nature. In addition to an evaluation of who God has placed in the body, it is also important to determine what is the cultural background of our leadership team. While leadership itself may not attract first-time visitors, the style and personality of the leadership will determine if they come back and become members. Thinking through questions such as what kind of leader am I and what kind of people do I naturally relate to can be helpful in reaching our potential and being effective as a leadership team. Understanding who we are and who God has specifically called us to will give us greater purpose and direction in our particular role in reaching all peoples. While the message of the gospel does not change, who are we best suited to reach as a church will determine how we present the gospel for greater impact. For example, the greatest church planter of all time, Paul, had a completely different approach depending on whether he was in a community which was primarily Greek or Jewish. This had to do with who he was and who his audience was. Now, some of the questions we must ask ourselves are, as a leadership team and a congregation, who are we best suited to reach? What is a specific reason for our church to exist? And who are we best targeted to reach? See, no one person or one group can do it all. Answering these questions will help us determine what style of evangelism will work and how to best use our resources for the kingdom. Now, this does not mean that we compromise the gospel message, but we will need to adapt, just as Paul did, in order to be able to reach as many as possible. See, Jesus himself recognized that he had first been sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He had a focus and a target. Then in the early church, Paul recognized that he had been entrusted with the task of taking the gospel to the Gentiles, while Peter knew his primary commission was to the Jews. See, knowing our target is crucial if we're going to be effective and fulfill our specific mandate. As much as we try, we just cannot be all things to all people. And the genius of the church is that working together we can reach everyone, as the variety in each local church will appeal to all segments of our community. It is impossible for a local church to appeal equally well to all people. This is especially true of small churches. The larger the church, the more resources they have, so in terms of both people and programs, and so they can address a greater scope of needs and can target varied audiences. So while the whole body worldwide is commissioned to reach the whole world, it is freeing to know that each of us and every local church does not and cannot do it all. All we have to do is be faithful to do our part. And there are various ways to view those who we have particularly called to. One such matrix is to look at four main categories: geographic, demographic, cultural, and spiritual. First, geographic issues. Regardless of how mobile members of a society are, there is a limit to how far people can or are willing to travel to go to a local church. In a rural area, we must decide if it is one valley or one group of villages we can reach. In a city, if it's a city, what particular part of the city are we in? The more mobile the society, geographic considerations become less important, and the deciding factor has more to do with homogeneous factors. But as we have already discussed, due to cultural barriers, we may not be able to reach even those physically closest to us. I guess it's pretty obvious, but another reality is the size of the geographic target group may determine the size and the scope of the local church. If the church is in a small rural community, it's likely that it will never become a megachurch, which is probably a good thing. Has your team and your church considered the geographic considerations of your growth? Then there's demographic issues. When it comes to demographics, the good news is that the church growth is not necessarily dependent upon a highly detailed demographic analysis of those in the surrounding community. We usually just need to know the basics, such as the makeup of the community in terms of the ages, the marital status, income levels, education levels, and the main types of occupations. See, each of these factors creates different needs and affects how the gospel can most effectively be presented. Understanding this will help determine the similarities between the community and the church membership and leadership. Now, has your team done a study of your community? Now, thirdly, there are cultural issues. While there may be a variety of subcultures within a geographic or even a demographic boundaries, it is important to be aware that those who we are called to reach will have certain cultural similarities. These are the factors such as their mindset, their values, and worldview. What ties them together as a community? A local church needs to be aware of the cultural makeup of the community, which they feel particularly gifted and called to reach within the gospel. Making the effort to understand and identify with the culture does not mean that we agree or condone its values. But in order to be effective, we will have to incarnate the message of the gospel into their cultural language. See, most of the cultural subtleties are not easily perceived by a quick glance or an outward appearances. Time must be invested and relationships developed in order to truly understand the needs of these varied groups. What are their values and worldview, those in your community? What cultural characteristics of your church cause a barrier in your ability to reach those in your community? And perhaps what steps do you need to take in order to remove these barriers and at the same time not alienate your existing members? Fourthly, spiritual issues. Knowing the spiritual background and presuppositions of our community is necessary in order to know how to best witness to them. Do they believe there is a God, or maybe just a universal being? Knowing the spiritual condition of our target community is the first step in being able to build bridges. We must begin with any beliefs or values that we already may have in common with them. When we are new to a community, the best resource to determine the current spiritual climate of the community is often other local spiritual leaders. While it takes time and effort to determine the spiritual needs of those we are targeting, without this understanding, it becomes difficult to determine the how of evangelism. Our methods need to be born out of our understanding of the felt needs of our target community. We need to be wise so as to spread the seed of the gospel in receptive soil. What is the particular spiritual condition of the soil in which you and your church find yourself? Care should also be taken so as to not ignore the cyclical seasons of planting and harvest. Ignoring this can hinder and undo many good intentions and efforts. See, this is applicable for both individuals and communities. So as you and your team evaluate the spiritual condition and needs of your community or your target group, what do you learn? What bridges of understanding can you build in your community? This workshop is part of our team coaching series created to assist those serving in the body of Christ. The goal is to help you and your team grow healthy, multiplying churches. This workshop corresponds to leadership team coaching in episodes 1 to 12. Now, the complete workshop, Local Strategies, is covered here in episodes 28 to 30 and is available as a download. This workshop is part of the Coach's Playbook discussed in Section 5 of the Leadership Team Coaching, which we saw in episode 12. You can also follow the links to the free resources for this workshop, which include the Church Planners and Leaders Competency Assessment. And don't forget to check out some of my other podcasts, such as the Multicultural Teams and Fivefold Ministry podcast series, in which I discuss these topics in greater depth. Next time, we will continue our discussion with some practical steps local churches can take in reaching into their community. While this is important in a new church plant, how can we as an existing church maintain a multiplication mindset?